are you listening to? Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.
Welcome to Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn. This is episode 8, and we're happy to join you. Session is still going on.
Oh, it's been crazy. This is crazy time.
Yes. Yes, and you know, was a former legislator. So tell us about this. Like, what are we, 3.5 weeks in?
Yeah,
we have
so
2.5 left.
We're about in the middle, and this is kind of like the do or die time. Like, if your bill's not drafted, if your bill's not moving, it's not in committees, then, you know, the likelihood of it not going is pretty good. Although, shenanigans happen at the end, where because there's not very much time, all the rules go out the window. You don't need committee hearings, you don't need public hearings, and sometimes that's strategy. So you got to watch that. You got to watch what gets snuck in. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like half the bills or more get passed in the final week when they haven't had a committee hearing. And so they call it suspension of the rules. So they throw all the rules out of the window. Well, if that's your bill, like you're glad you've been working on it and you wanted to get through, but it's not your bill, you're going, yeah, what did they just sneak in?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you from this side, being a citizen now, I'm like, wait, I know how they do this.
Yes, that's right. You know
this.
better than most of us. Even those of us who've been watching it and involved in it, it's different than being one of the players in it like you have been. Yeah.
Well, and some of the things that happen too, and actually it's kind of a study in parliamentary procedure and things like that is and even just how we do things. So if you still have a couple hundred bills left, but you only have a few days left in the session, they do something called wiping the board. And they make all of them disappear because normally they go in an order, right? How the order that they come out of committee and get put in front of the full bodies. But then they just wipe it and now say, okay, now we're going to pick which ones. Because if we can only do 50 more, which 50 is important? They go back to the other legislators and say, okay, which ones do you all support getting back on the board? And everything else kind of dies. And so, I learned that, okay, it matters who those other 74 people are that are in the legislature, and everybody in the state should care. It's not just your person, your rep that has that vote. Yeah. I mean, sometimes the other 73 or 74 are deciding if your bills move at all in the end.
And I think it's important to point out that I think in the state, we pay attention to this in Congress at the national level, but most people do not know who the House Speaker and Senate President are. And the fact of the matter is that they and their leadership team may matter more than who the rest of the House members or senators are.
Because ultimately, they are going to decide what goes on the board. And then the real fun stuff starts happening when the House has X number of bills, the Senate has X number of bills, and then the leadership of both is saying, wait, put ours first in your House, and then they're like, no, you put ours in your House, and then you have real negotiation.
Hey, there's a lot of negotiation that takes place
frequently
at that point.
over budgetary things, but also over leadership pet things.
Yep.
So, so it's interesting to watch. I mean, watch the last week, but we're headed into, we still have another week or so of committee hearings, but then things are going to get super crazy.
And then committees end, right? And like you said, not only can those bills not get through a committee in time, there are no committee hearings. Is it the last week?
Right. About a week and a half, yeah.
Okay. So another week of committee hearings and
that's it.
We're done.
That's it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there aren't still bills
that are coming
back there, because sometimes that's a strategy is let's just hold this bill back until it's the last week
until we're done
and bypass the whole committee hearing process. And so I think if the legislature is ever going to get it wrong, that's the week to do it. That's when crazy tax
And can
policies.
I just say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you remember, I think it was maybe 4 years ago, there was a bill that was a priority for leadership in the House, and it had passed on the last day of the session over in the Senate. So I don't know, I don't remember what the timing was through the House, but it got through the Senate last day of the session. all day long, there were communications over there. Where's the bill? Where's the bill?
Get it
Because
back, get it back, get it back.
physically has to be walked back over to the house.
Right.
And it came back to the house at 12:01.
Yeah, and now
It was dead.
What is important to know is it's clock strikes, everything turns into a pumpkin.
It's gone.
And so it's done.
Which is constitutional.
Right.
There's no messing with that unless
Right.
you want to change the Utah State Constitution.
It
And
ends
this
straight up
bill
midnight.
had literally just gotten lost in the Senate.
Yeah.
They-
And it was an important bill to a lot of people. I don't remember what that was, but
I
I
can't remember what it was.
I remember the disappointment, the energy, the like, what happened? And like we're watching the clock and we're like, run,
That's
where
right.
is it?
That's
Run! And yeah, too late.
And
But
it was lost in a bunch of papers because that piece of paper had to be delivered back to the house before
physical.
midnight.
And there is definitely an electronic digital
Yes.
portion of that, but there is a
Yes.
physical thing with signatures that just has to be passed. And what is funny is there are hallways behind the House and
Yeah.
the Senate, and that the public doesn't normally see. And there is literal running. I have sprinted so many times going to the Senate and back and forth, and so a lot of that, just watch and see.
Yep.
It's going to be exciting. So what are you following? You were on the Hill today. What did you follow?
I was on the Hill all day. There were a couple of really interesting bills, one that passed, one that didn't. So the first committee hearing that I went to began at 8, and the last one began at 4 and finished at 6. So it was quite a
outcomes
day.
that you liked?
One that I did, one that I didn't. There was a federalism bill this morning, first thing, and that was a disappointment to see some of the votes against
So this
that.
is the Ken Ivory bill.
This is the Ken Ivory bill.
And I think we can say, the one in the morning, we had Representative Perucci on earlier this week, right? Is that the one you saw this morning?
No, it was
that
the
was-
Ken Ivory bill this morning.
It was this morning, okay.
Representative Perucci would normally be on the committee where this was heard,
Okay.
but she was presenting her bill in another
Okay.
committee. So there were a lot of people missing from that because I think they were presenting. And they probably, a few of them would have been yes votes. But
So
that
this
one
was the
failed.
Ken Ivory
It
bill?
was the Ken Ivory federalism bill.
So you listened to that hearing. Why? Like, why don't our representatives understand the fundamentals of our government?
Well, I don't think that's what
Or
it was
what
about.
was it?
And there were some concerns that it was Article 5 that tanked it because some of the conservatives are concerned about Article 5 of the Constitution being utilized in order to have a constitutional convention or an Article 5 convention, excuse me. There is a differentiation.
Yes.
And concerns about it kind of being hijacked and taken out of control and some bad things occurring, and they'd rather have the status quo than that risk.
Which is that Congress is the only one who can
That's
pass,
right, which isn't
pass
working for
amendments, versus they want
Yeah.
they don't want states to be able to make
Yeah.
amendments.
And right now we have a lot of good state legislatures and good state legislators, I think, who can be trusted. I don't know how much longer I feel good about that. But ultimately that wasn't the issue. I think there was there was some speculation that it was. It wasn't the issue. I had a feeling it wasn't. I had some conversations. I know Ken is working with some of the no votes.
So is the bill dead, or did it just?
It's dead for now. We'll see.
Okay, so what can happen, just so people know, is a bill can be voted down in committee, but the sponsor of the bill can still work the committee and kind of ask them to bring it back.
Yeah.
And if he can prevail on enough people that will, typically it has to be someone on the prevailing side asks to bring it back for reconsideration.
Yeah.
So a bill's not always entirely dead just because it goes down in committee.
Right. But you have to get, basically, this, they will not bring it back unless they know there will
Unless
be
you
the
have
votes to
votes.
pass it.
Well, because seriously, it had its chance.
It had its chance.
And there's so much to do. There's still so many bills to go. And so the committee's not going to want to reconsider unless everybody's ready to change.
But I will tell you too, so I know he's working on it. I do think there's another bill that I'm working on, that I have been working on, where even if we get it through committee, I have concerns about it getting through the House. So you kind of do have to weigh your options. Is it worth trying to get it through, making all the effort to sell it to the committee just to have it die. If it's something with a little more work and conversations, it's not urgent. It would be nice, but not urgent. Do you take the time to have those conversations in the intervening months before the next session in the intervening year, and feel really comfortable with it? So I do think there's a question there, but I know Ken is working on it to try to make changes that a couple of these reps would like to see.
That's good. One bill that caught my attention is one that would allow non-surgeons to operate on eyeballs.
Oh,
Non-surgically trained people, and basically, an ophthalmologist is an MD who goes through, umpteen years of medical school, then years of specialization, years of residency, years of practice, and Malcolm Gladwell said he in one of his books, I can't remember which one was.
I was going to say Tipping Point, but it wasn't. It was.
Goliath?
Yes, sorry.
No, David, no.
Anyway,
so he quotes that, or did some studies that show that expertise is gained after about 10,000 hours of practice. So there's a bill that would allow optometrists, that literally is Latin for measuring the eye, which is what they do. They produce lenses and things that then, through prisms and lenses and whatever and curvatures of whatever, they measure the eye and then modify your sight through apparatus. But they want to now operate on eyes.
So this is funny because I was actually today talking to some lobbyists, as everyone's kind of hanging out, right, out in the hall. You're up there, you're between meetings, you're seeing what kind of information you can gather. And I said, hey, what are you working on? And it was that bill. So,
oh, yeah?
Yes.
Wait, for or against?
It was for. I think.
So I think the bill would allow optometrists, eye measurers, to do surgery that they're not, they do have training. So it's not to, not to just optometrists, but they are not medically, they're not MDs with specialization in surgery.
Is there any type of additional training that they need or no?
I don't think the bill asks for that. I think the bill just is trying to expand their scope of practice. And so, I'm one that I don't like regulatory capture. I don't like burdensome licensure that restricts people. I supported on the Hill. I supported expanding the ability of nurse practitioners to fulfill more of what they were actually trained to do.
Yeah.
And not having licensure requirements when it's not really required for the job. But this is one where it's surgery on your eyeball, and the guy who normally measures you for glasses wants to put scalpels and lasers.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to have to go back and listen to the debate on that. And for our listeners, I don't know. Some people know kind of how the website works that the state has, and some don't, right? You can go back and listen to any of these meetings. You can look up the bill. There's a section where it says hearings and debates or something. Go to there. You can click on audio to listen to any of the debates. And I'll sometimes do that, even if it's a bill that I know pretty much what's going on with it, but I want to kind of know what the opposition was or, some of the questions that were asked.
So here's something I discovered today that's awesome about the website. When you go look at a bill, you can click on hearings and you can listen to it at 1.5, 2, and 2.5 speed. So I was listening to Adam Robertson, sound a little bit like Mickey Mouse, presenting, leading the committee, but able to speed listen.
Yeah, that's funny.
So, yeah, that's good.
Well, and you know what? Okay, so I didn't get to this other bill that I was there for today, the 4:00 one that got heard around 5, and that is HB 60, which is the vaccine passport bill. The bill that is in opposition to vaccine passports doesn't allow them. And that bill passed. I want to say it was on a 9-4 vote out of the House committee.
My homework after listening to that committee is comparing what law schools the committee members went to. Honestly.
Yeah, there were some awesome questions in there, actually. I think there were, I'm guessing that you probably saw the one that really caught somebody up. Somebody who was in support of a business asking for, being able to ask for medical records of their employees. And, they apparently represent over 400 businesses. And the question was asked of them if any of their businesses had fired employees for not getting the vaccine.
Oh, I don't think I can tell you that.
Oh, it's worse.
Information.
The response initially was no. And so it was Representative Brammer asked the question.
Props to Brammer through that whole meeting.
Yes.
Props to Brammer.
Yes. And he asked the question, could I have a list of all of the companies that you represent? Well, there are 435 or something, so no. And he said, well, can you get it for me? And the response was yes. And he said, so again, you're telling me that none of these businesses have fired a worker for not getting a vaccine. And then the response was, well, I said, as far as I know, which was not said. In fact, I'm quite certain it wasn't said in the initial. I am going to go back and listen to that, but I don't think it was.
Yeah, so I mean, remember.
And it gets worse. Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
And then it was, well, I don't think it would be appropriate to ask them if they have.
Okay, so here's the deal. This is a committee hearing.
Yeah.
And this is testimony on the record.
That's right.
And let's be clear, it is a crime in Utah to give false testimony.
Okay, I actually did not know that.
Yes, it is a crime. It's a misdemeanor. I think it's Class B misdemeanor. But it is a crime to give false information, in a public meeting to an elected official. So
I did know that. Yes.
Yeah, so you've got to understand, when you sit on that stand and you are giving testimony, you're now open to being questioned too. And I don't want to say that in a way that intimidates anybody to do this process, because it's not like they grill on you personally.
No.
But
if you're going to represent 400 companies
and say that and try to use the weight and influence of 400 companies, then you are subject to some questioning.
Yes.
And this lady was not willing to stipulate to give any details on this, just to casually throw out, I represent 400 people, 400 businesses, and we oppose this bill. But so honestly, here's the thing. And we've said this in a previous podcast. I think that it was Representative Brooks, Walt Brooks, that ran this bill. It is a misguided notion to think that the government should not tell a business that it can't discriminate. Now, and we all know that some government regulations have gone too far. But for a couple of people that I really like and respect, one of them went pretty far down the road to say this will be a burden on businesses, that government should not get in the space of telling businesses what they should do. And here's why he's wrong. Because the government has a prime directive. The number one thing is to protect our rights.
Yeah.
And for the government to say, reminder, everybody, you don't get to discriminate against people for health status and health decisions. You don't get to deny people the ability to buy bread for their family because of your political positions.
Yeah.
And then the using a health status to do that. And first of all, what does it cost a company? What does it cost a company to say, I can't ask you if you had cancer, or if you're pregnant, or if you have HIV, or if you plan to have some health procedure? So it's already inherent in our law and in our civil rights that you cannot ask these questions,
and
take these
and
actions.
that point was made in the presentation. Did you listen to those? So
Yeah.
when Representative Brooks was making his presentation, those two businessmen who spoke to it within his presentation, I turned to the woman next to me and said, "We're done. Nobody else needs to even make public comment unless you're against, because everything, every argument that could be made from that perspective of an employer was made. Like
Right.
it was over. They did an excellent job of covering all the bases.
Well, for
on
me
that.
to know as an employer, for me to know that I can't ask you a health status does not cost me anything.
Right.
It's not an overburdensome regulation. And
And did you notice at the close, Brooks said, and I loved it, he said, people have argued that we can't mandate, we don't like mandates, so we're passing another mandate. He said, no, we're not. We're getting rid of the mandates that
Right.
are already there. That is not passing another mandate.
That's right.
That's saying this was all driven by government, if you remember, right? By the federal government telling business that they had to, and then a whole bunch of businesses thought, well, that's a cool idea. And he's saying, you know what? We're getting back to the way we used to do things. This has never been acceptable. It's not going to start being acceptable now. That is not a mandate.
No.
And I think we've allowed people to play games with the language to try to manipulate us or fool us, and it isn't working. It's not a mandate.
That's right. That's right.
So-
well, one of the things too that someone brought up actually a couple times. Well, this is going to cause a problem with federal regs because the feds
Yeah.
are still requiring certain things, and so that's going to place us in a conflict and maybe expose us to liability. You know what I say to that? All day long, bring it.
Well, there
All
were already
day
federal
long,
carve-outs.
bring it.
So there was one possibly legitimate one that was brought up, and
Right. And I think
Brooks
that's
will
covered.
deal with
Yeah.
that. Yeah, if it isn't already. But so we are going to welcome Representative Kera Birkeland, who is here to talk to us today, actually about HB 11, which is her Women in Sports bill. She has been in the legislature. Tell us, is this your third session or second?
It'll be 2 years in April.
Okay,
2 years in April.
So she came in on a special election
Yes.
and then stood for your first election, like general election.
Right after. Yeah. And she is in Morgan. Tell us your area, Kara, Representative. Tell us what areas
It
are around
covers
you.
it covers Rich County, Daggett County, Summit County, Morgan County, and Duchesne County.
Okay, you have a big area once you get out out there. Okay, so Representative Birkeland loves controversial bills, especially when it comes to sports, and she's going to tell us about one of hers. She really, to start out with this, I think, so you had a bill similar to this that protected women in sports last year. There's a lot of work that's been done in the interim since then. So why don't you just start out by telling us some of the differences and then what this bill does specifically?
Okay, so last year it was House Bill 302. If you want to look it up online, what it did was said that you transgender athlete needed to play this on the sport team that was, I guess the word is, consistent with their identity at birth. And I always try to be sensitive of the verbiage because we don't need to
Assignment,
offend
I
people.
think.
Yeah. I think, I try to be sensitive, not because I'm woke, but because, people's feelings matter to me. And so if you were born and identified male at birth, and you wanted to transition to female later, great, but you needed to play on the boys team. And that's what last year's bill was. Just great, cool, you're awesome, but you're going to play on the boys team. That died in the Senate, passed wonderfully in the House, but died in the Senate. So this year, the bills had a couple potential bills. It was original bill was something totally different, but this last iteration is a commission. So essentially, the goal of the commission is to make sure that, number one, it's constitutionally sound, so we're not litigated. Because the problem with even if I had passed last year's bill, just as every other state in the nation that passed that bill, it's litigated. And which means while it's being litigated in every state, the bill's enjoined, which means the bill's not enforceable. So if the goal is to keep transgender athletes from just playing on the women's teams, the bill hasn't accomplished that yet in any state. And so
So has
honestly,
Has any of those gone to court, or have any of them gone to court, or are they just in process? Are there rulings?
They're all been in court. There have been rulings in some that said that it was unconstitutional, so it's gone up to the higher court. Idaho was the very first one to run a bill like last year's bill. And it's been 2 years now, and it's still not being enforced because there's still pending litigation on it, and they haven't, they enjoined it this entire time. And Florida and some of the others, I think it's 10 states in total. Haven't been able to enforce them yet because, what happens is you have one, you pass the bill, and then one kid has the ACLU backing them, and they go and sue. And so as soon as that lawsuit gets filed, the courts just say, well, we don't want any damage from further potential lawsuits, so we're just going to not enforce it. So just let's hold it there. So it keeps it to one lawsuit, essentially, because it's enjoined. So this bill, hopefully, the number one goal is we don't want to be sued so that we can't address the issue. Now, you can't always go off that, but we've worked really hard to make sure that it's constitutionally sound. And by doing that, we think that we have a process that will be fair, because it does say there's a path for transgender athletes to participate, but not at the risk of destroying women's sports. So if you're going to have a material competitive advantage, and this commission is going to decide that based on, if let's say you want to play basketball, you can't just show up and say, I want to be on the team and get picked to be on the team, and then just go dominate. The commission is going to look at your hip to knee ratio. If it's basketball, it's going to look at, okay, if you're a 15-year-old, what's the average height? What's the average speed? What's the average, again, the lung capacity? They're going to have a pulse ox monitor. What's your heart rate at? They're going to do bone density tests to figure out. So it's not going to be invasive to the point where they can't just have a discussion and find out some of these things right there. But it will be, if there is any cost to it, we will be providing funding, which we figure it's going to cost maybe $1,000 a year in just some simple things that the child would have to agree to do, but they can ask and they can say, no, I don't want to do that. But we're hoping that most kids will say, well, yeah, I'm not worried. I'm not huge. I'm not going to be a Leah Thompson. I just want to play sports, right? But the idea is we want to make sure there's no safety risk to that child or the people that they're going to be competing against, and there's no material competitive advantage. So it's quite a criteria of things that the commission's going to be studying, and they'll create like a baseline so that they know, and we'll start making decisions based on real data that's nowhere to be found so far.
So I keep hearing on this and a host of issues, well, this isn't really happening in our state. So why are we addressing it? And frankly, I think it doesn't matter, right? Because we know it's coming even if it isn't already here. But tell us, is this happening in Utah?
Yes. Yeah. I think one of the most obnoxious things, and I'm just being blunt because it's been like a 20-hour day already, is when people say, this is a solution looking for a problem. I'm like, you sound like someone who lives in Park City and you don't think homelessness is an issue because there's no homeless people where you live. It's just naive to say that. Last year, there were no kids who went through the High School Activity Association and their policy saying, I'm a transgender athlete, I'm going to go for your policy. There were none. But there were lots of kids who were competing. This year alone, 2021, 2022 school year, there's 3 kids that I am made aware of. There may have been, another one since then because I asked back in October, and, a whole nother sporting season has taken off since then. But there were 3, and they were in swim and volleyball. But I know of at least half a dozen to 8 more that haven't gone through the Activity Association policy. In fact, 2 my daughters have competed against in high school basketball. Two kids. So it is happening. Yeah. And whether it's a huge issue, no, I get that it's not rampant in the state, but it's something that we're going to have to deal with.
Well, let me ask you, what has been your experience as you're hearing the stories of the female athletes? Like, what does this do to their morale, to their hopes and dreams when they, that is a new wall, that's a new ceiling that they can't always compete against someone who is structurally
Superior.
superior or different.
Can we say that? I don't think we can say that.
But structurally, they're different, and that whole nature of competition
Yeah.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and we should say that because any official knows that when you want to do, let's say it's basketball, men's versus women, the physicality on the men's side, it's just known to be greater physicality, so there is an advantage. And so when we've played and throughout the last couple of years, when we've played transgender kids, the girls are always they're just off. And these haven't been kids that have just dominated. They were good. They were probably some of the best kids on their team, but they haven't dominated by any means.
Okay, so hold up a second.
Just, number
Kara,
one,
Representative Birkeland, you said when we've played, so I don't know that we have the context for the authority with which you speak.
yeah. So I coach.
Okay.
So I coached basketball for high school, and when we've gone in, our team's gone in and we've played, their game has been off mentally. Not because the kids were physically blowing them away, although they were good. They weren't physically blowing them away, but the girls are like, number one, we feel guilty that we're unhappy that they're here. Like, we've created a society where women have to hold back. We've seen this with the girls at University of Penn, where they, for the longest time, didn't say anything about Leah Thompson because they didn't feel like they were allowed to not be okay with this. And so they sat in the locker room and they were pretty upset at, like, oh, no, it doesn't bother me. No, it doesn't bother me. I'm like, well, why are you crying? We're winning. Why are you crying? Literally, we were winning. And they're like, well, it's just hard. And some of the girls said it's hard because if they were being told, like, you're going to go out and play against boys, they could handle that. Like, we're going to go play against boys. And yeah, that's crappy, but it's what it is. But when they're told you're going to play against a girl and nobody knows, like, we're like, well, we know that the Activity Association said that there were no trans basketball players, so who's vetted these kids? That's not fair. Like, the girls are like, this isn't right, it's not fair, and we don't think we should have to play when it's not fair.
And for some of these women and girls, it's not just about the game and playing the game. For a lot of them, it's their future, and it's an integral part of their future, and competing for college, competing for pros, competing for all those things that if they can be eliminated in high school, eliminated early in college, it's not just the game.
Opportunities are taken away from them.
Right.
Truly.
And really with things like Title IX, we worked so hard. I mean, our nation kind of rallied around some of that equality in sports and opportunities for women. So some of this is feeling like a little bit of a step backwards for some of these athletes.
And I have a question. So are we seeing any girls who've transitioned to being boys playing on boys teams?
No. So
Why
I know
not?
the girls that transition to boys, they typically stay on the girls team still, at least the ones I know, and I can only speak to the girls that I know, and the parents of the transgender boys that I know. They play on the girl. But the problem with that though is some parents have expressed concern is these girls who are transitioning now to boy, they're taking testosterone.
Yes.
And that's a whole nother fairness issue that isn't being addressed. There's a lot of issues that are wrapped up into this transgender youth participation because, you have someone that was born a girl who transitioned to boy, but they didn't change their birth certificate. They're still, in the eyes of the law, a girl, but then they show up to maybe their high school softball team and their coach is denying them from being on the softball team. And there's issues with that. Like, this whole thing in Utah is going on in our sporting programs. We've had issues with girls who have developed themselves fully 100%. They have breasts. They are well-developed young ladies who've decided to transition to boy. And then when they show up to swim and compete in swim, they want to wear the Speedo. And all of this has been an issue that we don't want to sensationalize, and we don't want to, when I say we, like myself and the people who are trying to preserve women's sports in our state, but we also want to acknowledge that it's happening. We don't have to, make anyone feel bad or call people out or out them in any way. But that doesn't stop it from happening.
Right. And I do remember that we've been told that people can do whatever they want and it doesn't affect us. And we're seeing a whole lot of things that we were told would not affect us. So sit down and shut up, affecting every aspect of our lives, affecting our sports, affecting possibly religious worship. In a number of ways. And I think within the next few years, we will see that come down pretty hard. We're seeing it impacting our schools and our children in schools, just in learning environments, in locker rooms. These things have everyday impacts on all of us when we decide to change the rules by which our society functions.
So I have a final question for you. We're not the only state going through this. Every state is trying to figure this out. And are you leading on this policy? Are you working with other states maybe to see some who are further along through litigation? I mean, is there any national kind of activity you're working with?
Yeah, so last year I was working with Idaho. I ran a bill very similar to theirs. This year I spent the summer working with people around the state and also working with people outside of the state, like figuring out at different conventions, how are you addressing it? The idea of this commission doesn't come from another state necessarily. However, I talked to lawmakers in other states to get their input and feedback. And it is so far the only one that I know of that's going by a commission standard this way. But that's because so many of us watched what happened in the other 10 states and we're like, well, that's not really solving the problem. We've got to figure out a different solution. And I think, who is it that said that, the states are the laboratories for the nation, right? Let's let Idaho and all those states continue their lawsuits and see where they end up. And if they can have great success there, perfect. And I think we as state leaders need to take other approaches so we can figure out what's the best model for the nation.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So are other states, now that you're doing this and talking to some of them about it, are there other states that are considering implementing something similar?
There are a few others. I haven't had a ton of time to kind of go through it because I want to make sure that we're getting it right for us and then, kind of sharing more about it. But I have talked to a few people from different states, just keeping them aware of what we're doing. And we've got, 2 more weeks left. Then I can kind of spend a little bit more time visiting with other reps in other areas about it. But I'm trying to, between this bill and the other bills I'm running, I'm trying to make sure I focus here on getting it right here first.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes, it truly is. Thank you so much. You've taken on some big issues and you have kept going regardless of the arrows that have come your way. So thank you.
Yeah, last year was harsh. Last year was, wow. I was just watching you hold your head up and that was a pretty tough year. So, kudos to you for working on a solution over the last year.
Yeah,
it's
really.
Maybe something that really works. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
And thanks for being up this late. We're recording this pretty late tonight, and so thank you so much for being
Yes. Yes, we appreciate it.
Thank you guys. I appreciate what you guys do.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Representative. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Straight Talk with Kim and Carolyn.
And thank you, Fosmu, for all of your genius work behind the scenes.
I try.
Okay, again, please give us a follow, like, and share where we can be found on all the places that you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks for bearing with us on Facebook for our first,
Yes,
eight or so episodes. But now you can listen to us on your drive home from work now.
Yep, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, wherever you find your
Rumble.
Wherever you find your podcast, we're out there. And yes, we're on Rumble, and we're still on Facebook and YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Again, please share with your friends. That's how we get the word out, and how more people get to engage with us. And so.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.